With that, thanks. This year's Tour de France is underway and it's in its final week. And to celebrate, I decided to research a long forgotten figure from the race's rich history, someone who deserves much more recognition for his unique accomplishments than he's received in the public. His name is Calvino Cilantro. The title of my speech is Calvino Cilantro's Wheel of Fortune. Calvino Cilantro was born in Naples, Italy in 1898, and he became the first person to finish the Tour de France while riding a unicycle. He rode the unicycle for the entire race. A unicycle. To begin with a brief history of the unicycle itself. The origins of the unicycle are unclear, but according to the unicycle book by Jack Wiley, they were developed independently in many places at many different times. The first patent for a unicycle was introduced by Frederick Myers in New York City in 1869. The Tour de France itself is the most famous bicycle race in the world. In his book, Le Tour, Jeffrey Wheatcroft tells us that the race was begun in 1903 as a promotional event for Lotto newspaper, an early automobile magazine. The Tour de France traditionally consists of 21 stages contested over 23 days throughout France and sometimes in neighboring countries such as Belgium or the Netherlands. Now I'd like to turn to the subject of my speech today, Calvino Cilantro. Growing up in Naples, Calvino's first job was as a newspaper delivery boy. Instead of following the usual lead of his friends and riding his route on his bicycle or going by foot, he turned heads in his Naples neighborhood by covering his route on a unicycle. The cobblestone streets were a challenge that led Calvino to develop a lot of strength and skill as he rode his unicycle around town. As he got older and became a teenager, Calvino began to organize and enter unicycle races in Naples, usually leading the pack in his flamboyant costumes, as in this photo. We can see him, Calvino, and his competitors posing before the start of one of the races. You can see that the unicycles in this photo have really, really large wheels. And for shorter races, the large wheels resulted in more speed, but they were also a lot more dangerous and took more skill to control. As he grew older, Calvino became more and more accomplished at unicycle racing. He started to enter races outside of Naples, throughout Italy and throughout Europe as a whole. Most of these races that he was entering at this time were longer races that took place over longer courses, even over several stages, and even sometimes over several days. They covered large areas of countryside with more hills, uphill and downhill, and a lot of varied terrain, much more complicated and demanding than the simple streets of Naples. For these kind of events, as you can see in this photo, the smaller wheels were more practical and performed better. They were a little bit easier to control and less hard work to pedal. The Tour de France had always been an event for two-wheeled vehicles, but by 1921, Calvino had become so famous throughout Europe that the organizing committee of the Tour de France had no choice but to accept his application to enter the race as a unicyclist. The publicity would have been really bad if they had refused to let him ride. Because a unicycle has no gears or conventional brakes, uphills and downhills are much trickier than on a bicycle. Cilantro had to be much more cautious on the downhills. Going downhill, he didn't have as much control, and he couldn't go too fast, so he lost a lot of ground to the bicyclists on the downhills. But most of the time, he was able to make up a lot of ground on the uphills because he had a lot more control and it was a little easier to pedal. On the flats, he had an advantage because his pedals directly drove the single wheel and he lost less energy through his chain. He didn't have a chain, as the other cyclists did. The unicycle was also smaller and more maneuverable, which helped Calvino take corners quickly and efficiently and make his way through traffic with the other cyclists. And you can see Calvino in this photo riding alongside the cyclists. So he's probably moving up past a lot of them. Calvino's stamina and skill helped him overcome some of the disadvantages of the unicycle. And in the 1921 Tour de France, he finished a highly respectable and delectable 92nd place out of 139 finishers. According to Hugh Dauncey and Jeff Hare in their book Tour de France 1903 to 2003, 85 riders did not even finish the race. Calvino Cilantro became even more famous after his Tour de France appearance, touring Europe and establishing his own brand of racing unicycles. Sadly, his fame did not last long, though. Beginning the next year in 1922, in order to reestablish the primacy of bicycles, the Tour de France organizers specifically banned unicycles, tricycles, and any vehicles with fewer or more than 2 wheels from entering the race. That decision effectively killed off organized unicycle racing. And within a few years, Calvino retired from racing altogether, sold off his unicycle racing company for parts, and settled down to work at his father's olive oil business. The legend of Calvino Cilantro is now lost to the mists of history, but if you know where to look, his accomplishments still live on. And even though this is July, I'd like to wish everybody a happy April Fool's Day. The facts about unicycles and the Tour de France are real, but according to Joe Dudman, Calvino Cilantro is an invented character. As an epilogue, I'd like to tell you that in researching this speech, I did find that there's a real multi-stage unicycle race which took place in Nova Scotia for the first time in June of 2008. 35 teams from 14 countries competed along the 800-kilometer course. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Joe, I am in awe. That was a very, very interesting speech and very enjoyable. I'd like to introduce Jenny now as our evaluator for our second